All of our families have descended from Adam and Eve, and so we're part of the same family tree. We're just several generations removed. So we're going to be walking through or running through Abraham's family tree tonight. Briefly to introduce myself about who I am as an individual. So I'm 42 years old, cisgender male, heterosexual. I am a fourth generation Irish American. I've been married to my wife Jenny. We have two kids, a 5-year-old and a 2-year-old. I work at Loma Linda University. I have never been part of the military, though I have done research with the military. I'm an abstract sequential thinker. I'm an Enneagram 7, if you like that. I'm an ENFP, if you like Myers-Briggs. I like doing research. I like playing around. I just played some board games, in fact, with Tyler this afternoon, Tyler and Crystal. That was fun. I also do improvisational theater. We're going to do a little storytelling tomorrow in the afternoon. So I like to tell stories. I like to have fun. I like to smile. And I like to teach. I love teaching. And I love it when we all get to experience something for the first time. That's one of my favorite things. So I'm hoping that today and this weekend I'll be able to do some maybe paradigm shifting. So one of the first things we're going to learn how to do is how to read a genogram. A genogram is a family tree, but we're not just interested in biological relationships. We're interested in how the different people interact with one another. As a family therapist, I'm interested in family systems. What are the rules of the system? How do people interact with one another? Because every behavior is a symptom of the system. So I have two kids who have lots of behaviors. So I have Penelope on the left, she's 5 right now, and Phoenix, who is 2. And these are pictures of them as they're growing up. So Penelope is on the left-hand side, and Phoenix is on the right-hand side. So here's Penelope in a little backpack, and then here's Phoenix with myself on a carousel. So I'm missing them right now. Hopefully they're going down to sleep. That's the plan, crossing my fingers. Right now my wife is taking care of them so that I can be here with y'all. So tonight we'll talk about Abraham's genogram. Then tomorrow I'll be preaching about, the sermon title is Rail Meat. We're looking at the 9th fruit of the Spirit. And then tomorrow afternoon there's 2 sessions looking at relational triangles. And I'm trying to weave everything together so we can learn about our own family dynamics and Abraham's family at the same time. All right, here we go. So in family therapy training, we are able to watch family therapy through a one-way mirror. So there's a clinician with a family, and there are some trainees behind the mirror with a supervisor, and we're watching the family. We can't interact with them directly, but indirectly we can watch what's going on and we can talk with one another. That's kind of what's happening when we're looking at Abraham's family, through the one-way mirror of time. We're able to watch what's happening, but we can't interact with them directly. But we can definitely observe and ponder and reflect upon some of their dynamics. And every behavior that we see in a family, every behavior is a symptom of the family rules. Every behavior is a symptom of the system. There's no behavior that is isolated. It's all part of patterns. It's all part of either adhering to family rules or purposefully protesting family rules. If we can see all behaviors as part of this larger framework, we can start to understand where these behaviors come from. Family dysfunction rolls down from generation to generation like a fire in the woods, taking down everything in its path until one person in one generation has the courage to turn and face the flames. That person brings peace to their ancestors and spares the children that follow. Everything that we've learned, all the things we do in life, were built upon the foundation that we learned in our family or families of origin, depending on where you come from. So all of our dance steps we learn from that family, and we carry those dance steps into the future. And we end up using those same dance steps regardless of what sort of music is playing. And if we can see the dance steps that we have, the pattern behavior that we are a part of, we can make decisions to increase our insight into what those behavior patterns are and make intentional changes into what we do. So maybe you've never seen a family tree. This is a gummy bear family tree. You can see how on the top left, you see the red gummy bear on the very top left, and then the yellow gummy bear, and you see how they're kind of cross-section. They put those together for the children. Then that half yellow, half red is married to the green gummy bear, and then they have some children. So we're not just interested in biological relationships. We are interested in interrelation between different individuals. So this is what a genogram is. And we're going to take a moment to talk through this, and then we'll go on to this slide, but we're not there yet. All right, so on the top left, we have Thornton and Becca. Squares indicate male, circles indicate female. Thornton, there's a cross through Thornton. So Thornton has passed away at the time of the creation of this genogram. And he was partnered with Becca, probably married, partnered with Becca. And they've had 3 kids. And the order of the children, birth children, always go from left to right. So Tyson is the eldest. James is the middle, and he's passed away. And then Christy is the youngest. And we can see that that James has passed away, but he was partnered with Roxy. Are we all on board with this so far? Okay, Roxy. And they had 2 kids, Jeff and Trisha. See the triangle in the middle? That means Trisha identifies as gay, as lesbian. And she had a lesbian partner, and they had a daughter, Julie. But who created this genogram? Dahlia created this genogram. See a little square around it? That means this genogram is from Dahlia's perspective. Every person in this family could have made the same sort of genogram. It would have the same people probably, but the relational patterns might be different depending on the perspective. So we see that Dahlia is the eldest of 2 siblings. Philip is her younger brother. And then on Sophia's side, so her maternal side, we can go all the way up. Ricky and Catalina. Ricky has passed away, and they had twins, Roberto and Martin. See a little triangle coming from the same spot. Martin has passed away. Roberto was partnered with Karina, who passed away, and they had 3 children, Sophia, Emily, and Darian. Notice how there's this square with a circle around it? So Emily is trans. So she's a trans woman, and Damien is the youngest, and Damien was partnered with Lily. See the 2 hash marks between Damien and Lily? That means there's been a divorce. And they have a child, Bernice. At the very top, we have a question mark underneath, so the very top middle, we have a question mark underneath a square, meaning we do not know who the biological father is. But there was a separation or divorce between biological father and Gladys. Gladys has passed away, and they only had 1 daughter, Roxy. How are we feeling about this? Good? Okay, I'm going to move on. Yes?
Is this interactive?
Yes.
So
Berto and Martin? Mm-hmm. They're twins. They're twins. They came from the same birth date. Yep. Good. Ask me another question before I move on. No question? I'm going to take that as a secret sign. I can keep going. Here we go. Same family, but now with these interaction patterns. On the bottom left, you can see a legend. We're going to go through that real quick. A parallel green line means there's a close relationship. 3 red lines means fused. That means they're too close. They're upping each other's business, sharing the emotional turmoil between them. There's the jagged line that's red, that's conflict. The jagged blue line with an arrow means abuse. A dotted green line means emotional distance. And dotted red lines with hash mark in the middle means emotional cutoff. So we're going to walk through this. So Thornton and Rebecca on the top left. There is emotional cutoff between Thornton and Becca, and between Becca and her 2 sons, but she was super fused with Christy. Some people might use the word enmeshed. So really close with Christy, but separate from the males in the family. And we see that when we look at James, who's passed away, and his partner Roxy, notice all those jagged lines coming from Roxy. Do we see that? So she was the victim of abuse from her mother, Gladys. She's the perpetrator of some abuse towards Christy, so that would be James' younger sister. So between Roxy and her sister-in-law, there is some abuse between Roxy and her eldest son, Jeff, and her youngest daughter, Trisha. And there's a lot of conflict between Roxy and other parts of the family. In fact, a lot of people might say, like, Roxy's a problem, right? She causes drama. She stirs stuff up, right? But every behavior is a symptom of the system. Notice she was a victim of abuse from Gladys, and she was an only child. So there's a chance that the way she learned how to interact with people was what was modeled to her. And sometimes people who've experienced a lot of conflict are uncomfortable with vulnerability. Imagine you're getting to a hot tub or a spa, really hot water. As soon as you put your toe in, especially if it's cold outside, if it's wintertime like December, January, February, up in the mountains, there's a hot tub, you put your toe in, might be a big difference between the temperature of the water and the temperature of the air outside. And it might actually be unpleasant because of the temperature difference. Sometimes people who experience a lot of conflict and tension in their lives, this is the norm. This is typical for them. Not if they like it, but this is normal for them. And when they experience something different from that, it can actually be unpleasant and feel unsafe because they're expected something else. Their walls are up, they're expecting something bad to happen. So maybe Roxy is actually just trying to keep people at a distance because it's safer for her to do that way. Because maybe she never got to experience a nice, safe, secure haven, secure base. So because of that, this is the way she learns how to operate. And if we see that what Roxy is doing is just everything she's learned from her mother, or from other people around her, we start to understand she is part of a pattern. She is not the problem. The pattern is the problem. We look at Jeff is close with Roberto. So Jeff on the bottom left, the father of Dahlia, who's the person who created this genogram. Jeff and Roberto are close. And notice Jeff is a little bit distant from his biological father, James. But he's close with his father-in-law. Yet there's some distance between him and his partner, Sophia, and maybe distance from Roberto to Sophia. So maybe there's some special connection between father-in-law and son-in-law. Some special connection, because maybe the son-in-law didn't have the close relationship with his father that he wanted, but he found it in his partner's father. Notice how Jeff has a favorite son, has a favorite offspring, Philip, and Sophia has a favorite offspring, Dahlia, and Dahlia and Philip experience some tension between one another. So it's like each parent has a favored child. Do you see that? Over on the right-hand side, looks like Roberto's really close with Emily, maybe because Emily reminds him of his twin brother who passed away, Martin, I don't know. There's some tension between Emily and Darian and Sophia. So the kids, biological children of Roberto and Karina, all those kids have some conflict between them or distance within the family. And so I think that's interesting. Maybe Sophia is like, I came from a family with a lot of distance and conflict. I want to make sure when I have a child, I'm going to give a lot of attention to that child and make sure they know they are loved and cared for. And maybe she poured so much love and care into Dahlia that Jeff was like, well, there's tension between you and I. When the next one that comes along, like, that one's going to be my child, like my favorite child, and try to take care of them. So this is how families start to operate. Okay, ask me another question about this before I move on. What's something you see in the genogram that you think might be interesting or that you have questions about? Yep. The dotted lines, uh-huh. Uh-huh, that's some emotional distance. Correct. Good. They might have conversations, but there's no emotional interaction. There's no emotional investment, and that's different from cutoff. Cutoff means like I don't want to see you again. If we're in this, I've canceled you. If we're in the same room, I throw emotional wall, and I'm going to ignore you. I'd rather not be around it. I don't even want Thanksgiving. If I come over for Thanksgiving, I'm not going to greet you. I'm going to sit on the other side of the table. I want distance. So emotional cutoff is more severe emotional distance. Good. Over here.
So what if you have in the same family who work in practice, say, from Dolly's perspective, what if they have more than one?
More than one what?
So more than one relationship.
Oh, like Dolly? So like Dolly has a relationship with Sophia, her mother, and a relationship with Philip? So it can, good question. So sometimes there's more than one type of relationship happening, right? You can be the perpetrator of abuse. You can cause conflict. There can be emotional cutoff. There can be fusion. A lot of things can happen at the same time, absolutely. And so if we were going to show that in a genogram, we'd have the three lines, like from Beckett or Christie at the top left. We would also have a jagged line through that, meaning they're fused, but there's a lot of conflict as well. Good. So you can definitely mix multiple relational lines. Good. Is that a half hand coming up, Kenneth?
Yeah, right. So between Christy and Roxy.
Christy and Roxy,
Yeah, like that type of abuse looks different. That maybe I'm thinking the line from Roxy to Jack.
It's just the picture. It is the same. It's just supposed to be the same jagged line. We can actually indicate whether it's emotional abuse or physical abuse or sexual abuse or all three or undifferent, just some sort of abuse. But that just happens to be, when I copied and pasted it into PowerPoint, it just filled in some of the bottom parts of the triangles. Yeah, good question. Okay. We're going to be using this a little bit as we move forward. So I'm going to hope we're feeling comfortable-ish about this. All right, here we go. What are some reasons you think maybe we'll look at Dahlia and Philip. Why do you think Dahlia and Philip might experience conflict? So at the very bottom, what's some possible reasons?
Joe
jealous of each other's relationship with the opposite parent. Good, because they probably would also like to, in a perfect world, have a good relationship with the other parent as well, like really close, because they see how the other parent's taking their sibling out for ice cream or preferential treatment, maybe is more harsh on them but more lenient on the other. Good. What's another potential explanation for why people are relating in a certain way? Yes, Crystal. Yeah, Jeff and Sophia are emotionally distant. So kids have a little more difficulty being emotionally distant. Usually kids experience more conflict than emotional distance. Emotional distance is something we learn how to do as we become adults, right? The child is never choosing to be emotionally distant from their sibling or from their parents. It's usually the parents that are allowing that to happen or modeling that. Good. Okay. Awesome. Good questions. We're going to move on. It will take every triggered nerve, every tremble in your voice, every butterfly in your belly, and every rejoicing ancestor for you to say, no, I'm not doing this anymore. And this is important because if we can track what's happening in our own family and track specific behavior patterns across generations, it increases our insight into what we're doing. And we're going to be doing that with Abraham's family. We're going to identify different behavior patterns and show how those have been passed down from generation to generation. We'll be using the terms stress and anxiety interchangeably this weekend, even though there are some important differences between them. The way they manifest themselves in our body physiologically and our coping mechanisms in response to stress and anxiety are almost identical. But if you want to know the difference between them, I'm stressed when I have something specific that I'm stressed about. I'm stressed about taxes. And when I'm done with taxes, whew, I feel so much better. When I'm anxious about something, it's hard to put my finger on it. I don't always understand why I'm anxious. I'm just feeling anxious. So even if I get my taxes done, I'm still feeling anxious. Oh, okay, I wasn't stressed about taxes. I was anxious about something. So I'll be using those two terms interchangeably because we respond to them in our family and in our body very similar, even though there is a subtle distinction between them. So I know what I'm stressed about, and with anxiety, I don't always know exactly why I'm anxious. I just know that I'm anxious. Okay, in our relationships, we pass on stress and unresolved tension in our families. We just have this social exchange and agreement that I will give stress to you and you give stress to me, and we're one big happy family, and this is what happens. So I want you to imagine stress as like a hot potato or as staying power, and it's passed from person to person to person. And if we can see how anxiety and the accompanying behavior patterns, we can start to see why behaviors are linked to previous generations. So here are some of the things we'll be thinking about this weekend, specifically tonight. What are some of Abraham's family rules? What were the explicit, the named, or the implicit, the suggested family rules in Abraham's family? Because every behavior is a symptom of the system. And if we can know the system rules, that will help explain the behavior. What are the intergenerational patterns of behavior? This is a fancy word for monkey see, monkey do. What are the behavior patterns that are passed down specifically? How do people handle anxiety and tension? What are some of their coping mechanisms? How do they respond when there's tension in the relationships? Who are the villains? Who are the bad guys? Who are the heroes? Who are the good guys? Because every family usually has stories about the good guys and the bad guys. For example, Roxy in the previous genogram, she might have been a bad guy, right? There's a lot of drama around Roxy. But is she really a bad guy? Or is she just learning things from previous generations? And then here's another question I want you to be thinking about in the next few slides. If you remember, what chapter does the Abraham story begin? And who was Abram and Sarai's first son? Don't answer right now, but these are two questions I'll be asking you. So where does the story of Abraham begin? And who was the first son? Here we go. Here's our first part of the genogram. So Abram and Sarai, obviously their names change later on. And the story starts in Genesis 11, not in Genesis 12. Usually we like to start the story in Genesis 12, God's call of Abraham, right? But where you start the story actually tells us where you want to focus. So if I start a story once upon a time, God calls Abraham, you think that's the beginning of the story, right? The chapter breaks and the verses in the Old Testament were put in artificially. They were not written with those exact chapter breaks. So let's look at where the narrator started this story. He starts the story in chapter 11. And before we know that Sarai is Abraham's half-sister, we learn that she is barren. Before we learn that she is beautiful, we learn that she cannot have children. This is how the story starts. It doesn't start with God's calling, it starts with what's happening in this family. It starts with infertility. That's the beginning of the story. We are nestled right between August 22 and October 15. We're right between National Rainbow Baby Day and National Pregnancy and Infant Loss Remembrance Day. My family has experienced infertility. Both of my babies are rainbow babies. So if you've experienced infertility, you are part of Abraham's family, because this is something that at the very beginning of the story, the narrator said, this is what's going on. They've had difficulty having children. That's where the story starts. And this is super, super important for us understanding the rest of the life story. Infertility is a disease or condition of the reproductive system, often diagnosed after a couple have had 1 year of unprotected, well-timed intercourse, or if the woman has suffered from multiple miscarriages, and the woman is under 35 years of age. If the woman is 35 years old, it is diagnosed after 6 months of unprotected, well-timed intercourse. After Abram and Sarai move to Canaan, after God promises them they'll have children, they have to wait 25 years. There's a real big delay between the promise and them experiencing and having Isaac. 1 in 8 couples have trouble getting pregnant, and 1 in 4 women will experience a miscarriage in their lifetime. The Bible, in the story of Genesis, does not use the word miscarriage. Infertility. So I would not be surprised if this was also happening. It's just that they did not use that word in Genesis. So this is where most people think the story starts. The call of Abraham. But remember, there's this background of infertility. So listen to the themes of God's call to Abram and Sarai. Go forth from your country, so the place where you live, the land, and from your relatives, from your father's house, to the land which I will show you. I will make you a great nation. I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you shall also be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and the one who curses you I will curse. And in you all the families of the earth will be blessed. So what are the two big themes in God's call to Abraham? The land and the family. See that? Country, the land, the relatives, the fathers, the family, the land, the nation, the name great, the families, the earth. So the idea of the family and the earth, this is what God's calling to Abraham is, and this should not surprise us. Earlier in Genesis, there's something that's forecasting that this is going to be a challenge. If you go back to Genesis 3, after the fall, God is talking to Adam, and he said, "Cursed is the ground because of you. In pain you shall eat of it all the days of your life. Thorns and thistles it shall bring forth for you. You shall eat the plants of the field. By the sweat of your face you shall eat bread till you return to the ground. For out of it you were taken, for you are dust, and to dust you shall return." But this first part of the line, "Cursed is the ground because in pain you shall eat of it." I don't think God is talking about blisters or sore backs. What is the real pain of working the ground to try and get food? What's the real pain? No harvest. When you're working the hard ground and the ground is not producing like you want it to. That's the pain. There's a lot of famine in the earth right now, right? Especially with global changes when it comes to temperature, right? So millions of people who are experiencing food insecurity or famine. This is the pain I think God is talking about. Not that we're going to get blisters, although we just put on gloves, right? That solves the problem, right? It's about the pain of the earth is not producing the food that you want. Let's listen what he says to Eve. To the woman he said, "I will greatly multiply your pain in childbirth. In pain you will bring forth children, yet your desire will be for your husband, and he will rule over you." I've often thought of this as it will be painful, physically painful to give birth. Now, I personally have never given birth. Right. And I don't explain what's happening, but after my wife and other people, there is definitely pain, and women giving birth is a very dangerous situation, right? But the pain of childbirth, not being able to have children, even though you want to have children, that pain is also traumatic and lasts. I think that's what God is talking about here. Not the physical pain, but the emotional pain, the emotional lift of trying to have children, the emotional lift of trying to produce food, but the food is not producing. So in this family, there's going to be famine and there's going to be infertility. And all 4 generations in Abraham's family, they experience famine and infertility. Mother Earth is not producing, and the mothers are not producing. This is the pain that they are struggling with. And that is what God is speaking to when he calls Abram and Sarai. So here's later on, Abram marries his half-sister, Sarai, and he has other brothers, and his second brother, Nahor, marries Milcah. This might look funny to us, but back then when you marry into your clan, this is typical. So now I kind of partner them. It's the same thing as here. I just partnered Sarah with Abraham and Milcah with Nahor, so trying to get everyone on the same level so you can follow along what's going on from generation to generation. So Terah, Abram, Sarai, and Lot. Who likes emails? Raise your hand if you like emails. Okay, so few people like emails. Okay. Who likes texting? Some, okay. If you like writing, you can thank Mesopotamians, right? Because they developed the writing. Have you ever heard, I don't want to recreate the wheel? It's because they already created it, right? They created the wheel. In fact, down in Ur, we get part of that word when we say urban. This was a major cosmopolitan city near the Tigris and Euphrates River. Because of irrigation, they were able to grow wheat and barley 3 to 4 times more than the surrounding areas, which means they had a surplus of goods in which to trade. So this is a wealthy, cosmopolitan city. Archaeologists have found that there has been running water in the city as well as in specific homes in the city. So this has been a place where there's lots of accessible creature comforts, shall I say, the luxuries of life. So this is a wealthy location. And God, when he calls them from Padamaran, we know that Abram and Sarah moved from Ur up to Padamaran at the top, and then God calls them down to the wild, wild west of Canaan. Very different. It's not a metropolis over there. More of a Bedouin camping, some smaller cities, but it's not a big metropolis like Ur. So it's a very different lifestyle calling them over to the west. So this is their story is about their infertility. And if you can see their story is about infertility, I think a lot of their story is going to make a lot more sense. So who is Abram and Sarai's first son? So first son, help me out. Ishmael. Okay, any other answers? Isaac, any other answers? Isaac, Ishmael. What if I told you they had a son before Ishmael and Isaac? They adopted Lot. Lot was their first son. Now you might say, well, Bryan, the word adoption doesn't show up in Genesis. It doesn't show up in Genesis, but let's look what the narrator does to make sure we understand what's happening. Abraham went forth as the Lord had spoken to him, and Lot went with him. Now Abram was 75 years old when he departed from Haran. Abram took Sarah's wife and Lot, his nephew. He's taking his nephew with him. His brothers passed away. They have adopted Lot. Yes. But when you adopt a child, does that become your son?
But it didn't come from them.
This is what happened. I'm glad you bring this. What's your name?
Lydia.
Lydia? Thank you so much for bringing this up. Sometimes we see adoption as a last resort, right?
Exactly.
A last resort. Well, back then, they did not have the foster care system, right? They did not have orphanages, right? If a child's parents pass away, the family is responsible for taking care of them. So while Lot may not be their biological son, they are taking care of Lot as if he was their son.
But the Bible doesn't say that it was their son. The Bible says Isaac was biological.
Yes, I agree. Let's look, just hold on to that thought. And I want to show you how much Abraham cared for Lot. So I'm going to propose that Abraham adopted Lot. Here's how you would draw that in genogram. You draw the dotted line just to show that Lot is the biological child of Haran and his mother, but adopted by Abram and Sarai. In Genesis 13 and 14, Abram lets Lot choose first. Hey, there's conflict between the shepherds. Where do you want to live? I'm going to let you choose first. Almost like, hey, you are my son. I'm going to let you choose first. Abram rescues Lot. If you remember the story in Genesis 14, the 4 kings from the east, so near the Mesopotamian area, they come to Sodom and Gomorrah and asking for tribute, for money, for taxes, and Sodom and Gomorrah don't want to pay. So these 4 kings take the people of Sodom and Gomorrah and take them as slaves, captive. Abram gathers some of his friends, vastly outnumbers, outnumbered, and he chases after them to rescue the people. Why? Because he wants to rescue Lot. Abraham bargains with God to save Lot's life, right? How much courage or gumption or desire is necessary for a man to bargain with the divine? So it's clear that Lot was very important to him. He said, "Oh Lord God, what will you give me since I am childless?" So I'm here in the childless piece. "And the heir of my house is Eliezer of Damascus." And Abraham said, "Since you have given me no offspring to me, one born in my house is my heir." So you've not given me offspring, but I'm still having a son. Yep.
Can you go back to that?
Yep.
So just, what's your hypothesis why the narrator would have said Lot is the heir
Instead of the head servant, right? Because Lot came with, he inherited some of his his biological father's sheep and flock, but he still needs to be trained. He's still someone who needs some maturing, some guidance. So even though he has some of his own stuff, so he's not going to receive Abraham's inheritance, but it doesn't mean that the parents can't care for the child. And we'll see later on how much, there's so much similarity between the way Abraham interacts with Isaac and Ishmael and Lot the last time he potentially sees them. We'll watch his behavior patterns. Yes?
How was Lot and Ishmael in the Abraham said, how old were they apart?
I don't know how old they were. It's clear that Lot is older, but I don't know the age difference. That's not clear. Great question. We'll get back to how Abraham interacts with his sons. So we know that Genesis 16, this is right after Abraham and Sarah go down to Egypt, right? Go down to Egypt because there's a famine, right? And they come back from Egypt, and they come back with some donkeys and some sheep and some goats and some maidservants and some manservants. And one of the maidservants is Hagar, right? And Sarah is having this challenge of infertility. And we often see Sarah's desperateness as unfaithful. Is this correct? We see her idea of giving Hagar to her husband as being unfaithful. Would you agree you've heard this sort of thing before? Maybe it's just me? Yeah? Yeah? That if she would have just had more faith in God, God would have blessed her. But she was jumping the gun and trying to get ahead of God and do things her way. And doing so caused a lot of problems, right? Have we heard that before? Okay. Okay. Who was the biological son of Hagar? Ishmael. Good. Who's the biological son of Sarai? Isaac. Good. Okay. Naphtali. Does anyone know, when we're going on to the future generations between Leah and Rachel, does anyone know who the biological mother of Naphtali is? How about Dan? Does anyone know who the biological mother of Dan is? Maybe, or are you sure it wasn't one of the sisters? Why do we make a big deal about who the biological son is here, Hagar versus Sarai, but we don't make a big deal about who the 12 children of Jacob and / Israel, who their biological mother was? In fact, when you look at the story of Rebecca came with her maidservant, and she was actually honored later on in the story. She was honored as this nurse maidservant. And we know that Leah and Rachel each had their maidservants. So what if this was the standard practice? And this was the IVF of the day. This is the in vitro fertilization. It wasn't like Sarah was the first person in history to say, I had this revelation. What if she was just following this standard practice? It can still be seen as unfaithful, potentially, but also seen as a common solution to the problem of infertility. Because we'll see in the story of Genesis, it's not just Abraham's family that experienced infertility. Another hand over here.
That was an interesting question you asked, like, noticing that a biological son of Abraham and Hagar. I guess we just follow the Bible, and the Bible shows us that Isaac was the biological father of Sarah. Isaac.
Yep.
And it doesn't mention anyone of Hagar's son, because she wasn't the biological wife. I mean, I'm sorry, the wife of Abraham.
Right. But she was still considered part of this romantic relationship, right? We don't talk, I think we make a big distinction between Isaac and Ishmael because of what happens in future generations. But 2 generations later, with the 12 sons of Israel, there's not as big of a distinction about who comes from a approved wife, Leah or Rachel, versus Bilhah and Zilpah, right? There's more of a distinction here than later on in generations. In fact, if you want to see who the biological sons are of Leah, Bilhah, Zilpah, or Leah, Leah, Bilhah, Zilpah, Leah, and then Rachel, those are the 12 sons. And if you could name who the sons are linked with their biological mother, that would be excellent. But we don't make this big of a distinction between us when we're talking about the 12 sons of Israel, right? They're just the 12 sons of Israel. We make a much bigger distinction when it comes to Hagar versus Sarah. Okay, so Hagar is heading home. She's running away from Sarah because Sarah is jealous of her now that she's pregnant with Ishmael. She's running away. God meets her, sends her back, but there's still some conflict between them. In fact, Sarah is not mentioned as being present at the birth of Ishmael. There's some emotional cutoff there. She has already rejected Hagar or rejected the baby as not her own. She makes a big deal about it. And I think maybe because she makes a big deal about it, that helps us think, oh, this is a big deal. And it is a big deal when there's just 2. But when there's 12, we know Joseph and Benjamin are the sons of Rachel, but the rest are just kind of mishmashed together. But this is clear that Ishmael is Hagar's baby. So there are some name changes in Genesis 17. There's circumcision. There's more mention of infertility, because infertility isn't experienced once, it's experienced across the life course. And then here is Abraham bargaining with God for the life of Lot. And we know that Abraham is not a morning person. There are 3 times in Genesis when Abraham gets up early in the morning. Let's look at these 3 times. Here's the 3rd time. In Genesis 22, the Akedah, the binding of Isaac. So this is the last morning, potentially, that Abraham will have Isaac in camp. So Abraham, he's an old man at this time, wealthy, has lots of servants to help him. But he rose early in the morning. Let's look at the red words. These are 6 different verbs. He rose early in the morning. He saddled his donkey. He took 2 of his young men with him and Isaac his son, and he split the wood for the burnt offering, and he arose and went to the place which God had told him. This is a lot of words used that could have been said, and Abraham got ready to go. The narrator is slowing down the process. We see this person near the end of the life course doing all of this hands-on work himself. This might be the last time he's with his son in camp. That's the 3rd time he wakes up early in the morning. The 2nd time he wakes up in the morning is earlier in Genesis 21. Ishmael's about to be sent off into the desert, basically to die, right? So Abraham rose early in the morning. He took the bread and a skin of water and gave them to Hagar, putting them on her shoulder, and then gave her the boy and sent her away. Again, 6 verbs to describe this man this is his last moments with his son. Here's the first time Abraham gets up early in the morning. This is just after he's bargained with God. So Abraham arose early in the morning, and he went to the place where he had stood before the Lord, where he bargained with God. And he looked down toward Sodom and Gomorrah, and he looked toward all the land of the valley, and he saw, imagine he's getting up early to find out what is the result. And behold, the smoke of the land ascended like the smoke of a furnace. This is the first time he got up early to see, is my son alive? So he's responding. The narrator is trying to give us a clue. Abraham feels similarly about the well-being of Lot, Ishmael, and Isaac. Abraham lies again to King Abimelech. This is not a new lie. He did the same lie to Pharaoh when he went down there the first time with a famine, saying to his wife Sarah, hey, will you just tell them that you're my sister? To preserve my own skin, will you do that for me? And he used the same lie with King Abimelech, again during a time of famine when they're looking for food. And then Abraham prayed to God, and God healed Abimelech and his wife and his maid so that they bore children. For God had closed fast all the wombs of the household of Abimelech because of Sarah, Abraham's wife. there's this idea that lots of people are interested in producing food, and lots of people are interested in producing children. Those are the challenges that are shaping this family. Where are we going to get our food? How are we going to get children? Everyone is desperate, even the fringe characters, like Lot's daughters, to not be infertile, right? We are trying to find children any way we can. People are desperate for this, just like we are desperate for food. Genesis 21, Hagar and Ishmael are sent out. Sarah pushes them out. And there's this cutoff between the family. The family is now ripped in two, right? We know that Ishmael comes back with Isaac to bury their father, but other than that, we know that Ishmael is a wild donkey of a man, and he's not going to be bridled. He's protesting any sort of system. He's a different sort of person than Isaac. Genesis 22, the binding of Isaac happens. So Abraham takes Isaac up to Mount Moriah, about to sacrifice him. God provides another sacrifice. Abraham comes back down out of the mountain. And now it came about after these things, I was told to Abraham, saying, behold, Milcah has also borne children to your brother Nahor. So what's happening here? We have the binding of Isaac. Abraham comes down out of the mountain. Then there's a little interlude. It's almost like back at the ranch, there's some other family members. Several family members, including this person named Rebecca. Now let's get back to our main storyline. The author is just trying to clue us in. There's this other potential person that's going to be important. So Genesis 22, there's this mention of this whole other part of the family, Rebecca and Laban. And we know Rebecca's going to feature prominently, as is Laban, later on in the story. So it's kind of like forecasting. These are some other characters you might want to get to know about. We know that Sarah passes away, age 127, and Abraham mourns the loss of his wife. But let's look what's happening in the story, and this might tell us a little bit about what might be happening in their relationship. Again, the original Hebrew did not have the chapter breaks or the verses. These were added in later to help those of us who have not memorized the Torah find the same place we're talking about. So, Genesis 22. So Abraham returned with his young men, this is after the Mount Moriah experience, and they rose and went together to Beersheba, and Abraham lived at Beersheba. So where's Abraham living? Beersheba, good. Then there's this back at the ranch. There's several people, including this person, Rebecca. Let's get back to our story. In the very next line, it says, now Sarah lived 127 years. These were the years of the life of Sarah. Sarah died in Kiriath Arba, that is Hebron, in the land of Canaan. So where did she die? In Hebron, right. And where is Abraham at? Beersheba. So, and it says Abraham came in. The language to also be that Abraham came up to mourn for Sarah and to weep for her. In this story, Abraham always refers to her as my dead. Only the narrator calls Sarah as Abraham's wife. So, a couple things could be happening here. One, the narrator of the story is not interested in lots of little tiny details. They're just trying to give us highlights of life, right? And maybe this didn't happen immediately after. But it's pretty clear that Abraham lived in Beersheba, but Sarah passed away at a different place. Now, we know that they move around, right? They're more agrarian. They have flocks, they have tents. They're moving around, so they don't always stay in one place. But there's a little bit of distance between where Sarah passed away versus where Abraham is at. Most of the story in Genesis happens down here in Gerar, Beersheba, a little bit south in Egypt. There's only 2 times there in Hebron. One, when they're coming down to the area, when God calls them, and then when Sarah passes away. Most of the story happens down here near the bottom. So what is this like? This is 26 and a half miles basically apart from Beersheba to Hebron. So let's look at this between these two. Let's look at this on Google Maps. So here's Beersheba on the bottom left. Here's Hebron on the top right. And so this kind of makes more sense. Here we are at Hayward SDA Church at the bottom. And just south of Pittsburgh, I don't know if you know where that is, but according to Google Maps, that's 26 and a half miles away. So Abraham's living down here, and notice there's mountains in between them, just like there's mountains over there. But Sarah passed away up there. What do we do with this? What does this mean? I don't think they got divorced. That's not a thing that would happen back then. But let's also consider what Sarah went through. She's living in the metropolis with running water into the city versus the wild, wild west of Canaan. A place where there's abundance of resources, where there's so much wheat and barley we have to trade it away, to the land of Canaan, where they experience multiple famines. Think about the way that her partner treated her, saying, hey, can you go and pretend like you're my sister? Save my skin? And the scholars of Genesis are not totally unanimous, but the bulk of them are in agreement that when Abraham gave Sarah to Pharaoh, she became part of his harem, and there were probably some relations between them. But because power dynamics was in hierarchy, it would be more likely that it was RAPE. And not only does Abraham take her back when he goes back up, but he's given gifts. So he's given maidservants, manservants, camels, sheep, goats. So he takes them with him, and it was so profitable for him, he does it again with Abimelech, right? So twice this has happened where your partner says, you go and pretend like you're my sister. That's how important you are to me. And there's no mention of Abraham having conversation with Sarai about, I'm going to take your favorite son up to the mountain. In fact, Sarah never speaks again after that incident. Sarah passes away. So I'm guessing and she's had years of infertility, conflict, when she tried to come up with a solution with Hagar, it did not go well. I bet there's a lot of unresolved tension between her and her partner.
And also, Sarah sent away Abraham's son.
Uh-huh. Yes. Ishmael said yes. 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 So I wouldn't be surprised, getting some tingles here, if this physical distance was representative of some of the emotional distance they could have had. Okay. Genesis 24. This is when Abraham calls his favorite servant, hey, I have a special mission for you. You need to go find a spouse for my last remaining son, Isaac. Okay? So the servant promises. He goes on a quest. He prays to God. At the well, Rebekah gives him water. There's the message about who he comes from, what's he there for. There's the moment of decision. Then he comes home with Rebekah, and Isaac brought Rebekah into his mother's tent, and he took Rebekah, and she became his wife, and he loved her. Thus Isaac was comforted after his mother's death. So there's this new matriarch in the family. Sarah's gone, but here's Rebekah, the person we told you about beforehand. Genesis 25, Abraham has another wife. He has 6 other offspring. He sends these offspring to the east so that Isaac can have all this space to himself. And Isaac really only has 1 chapter to himself. In some ways, Isaac is we've been waiting for Isaac for so long, and he's kind of a minor character compared to Abraham and Israel, right? Abraham, capital A. Jacob, who's renamed into Israel. And there's Isaac in the middle. But one of Isaac's most famous stories is when he's more passive, when he's tricked, right? Isaac does not play as big of a role. In fact, he never travels away from Canaan. Everyone else travels, but he doesn't. He seems more like a supporting character. So there's been this question in literature, is Isaac weak? Is he passive? Is he milquetoast? Who is Isaac? How come he doesn't do as much? And I think the challenge is, whoever we stand next to in the family is who we're compared against. So these are 3 individuals who know the inside of a weight room. Here's, on the left-hand side, it's Mark Wahlberg. In the middle is Anthony Mackie. He's Falcon from the Marvel films. And the right-hand side is Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. Look at their shoulders. They know how to move some weight, right? If I was seeing them on the street, they're walking towards me. I'm going to cross the street, thank you very much, and walk on the other side. They're big boys. But let's look what happens when they stand next to NBA players. Here's Shaq on the right, Charles Barkley on the left. And look at Mark Wahlberg, all in the black. He looks like he's 13 years old. He just took off his helmet. He had to ride his bike to go beat his friends at the gym. He had to ask his dad for some lunch money. Look how small he looks compared to the big boys, right? I'm a Seahawks fan. Here's on the left-hand side, number 14, DK Metcalf. He's like 6'4", 235 pounds of pure muscle. He's like 2% body fat. Next to Russell Wilson. So he's a big man right there. But let's look how small he looks next to another NBA player. He barely has his permit, right? He has to ask his dad permission. Can we go to the store together? Can we drive to Target? I need someone to drive with me in the car. He looks so small when you're standing next to someone who's so big. Abraham is a big name, right? A big man. Jacob/Israel is a big man. So Isaac is sandwiched between those two huge names. So it sometimes makes it seem like he's not quite as big as them. Even though he's a patriarch, he just doesn't have as much shadow as the other two. But Isaac, in his own life, actually does some pretty interesting things. Isaac is the only one who specifically prays the Lord on behalf of his wife because she was barren. It doesn't say that Abraham prayed on behalf of his wife, but Isaac did. The children were inside of Rebekah, struggled with each other, and she said, "Why is this happening to me?" So in the next slide, we're going to see a little picture. I think there's a QR code. If you want to see a picture of two babies struggling in the womb, you can look at this QR code. I'll give you a minute if you want to. You don't have to. So imagine Rebekah has some infertility, and she has these twins inside. She has these two little ones that are fighting inside of her. The idea is that they're wrestling with one another, and this could be very dangerous, depending on where the umbilical cords are, depending on what's happening with the kids. This is a very tenuous situation. So understandably, Rebekah is concerned about what's happening. Luckily, we know that she has some twins, Esau and Jacob. And finally, we get to hear a little bit about who these sons are. So when her time came to give birth, there were indeed twins in her womb. The first one came out red, covered with hair like a fur coat. They named him Esau. Name means red. After this, his brother came out grasping Esau's heel, so he was named Jacob, and Isaac was 60 years old when the twins were born. When the boys grew up, Esau became a skilled hunter, a man of the field, while Jacob was a quiet man who stayed at home. He was a man of the tents. Because Isaac had a taste for wild grain, he loved Esau, but Rebekah loved Jacob. So there is something happening between these two parents. They're preferring different children, some strong favoritism between them. But we know this is not the first time there's been favoritism, right? The previous generation, there was some clear favoritism, right? With Hagar and Ishmael, Sarah and Isaac. So this is not the first time that strong favoritism has come into play. Sometimes I imagine what it would be like as a therapist sitting with this family. What would happen? Because we know there's something that happens between Esau and Jacob, right? There's the famous story where Esau's out in the field, and he comes in and he is ravenous, right? He is hungry. He says, "Feed me or I will die." And Jacob is standing there and feeds him some soup in exchange for his birthright. Right? So back then, there's no such thing as top ramen, cup of noodle soup, or Kraft macaroni and cheese. You don't make single servings, right? If you're cooking, you are cooking. You're cooking for a group of people. So it's almost like Jacob takes a pan of lasagna out, and says, "I'll trade you a slice of lasagna for your birthright." I think this story we often see as like Esau, here it is, "Swear to me first," Jacob says. So Esau swore to Jacob and sold him the birthright. Then Jacob gave some bread and lentil stew to Esau, who ate and drank, then got up and went away. Thus Esau despised his birthright. And oftentimes I think we read this as, see, Esau did not care about his birthright whatsoever, as if something's wrong with Esau. But in that time, one of the big values was hospitality. There's no Airbnbs. There's no Taco Bells. There's no Motel 6s or Best Westerns or Holiday Inns. When people are traveling across the country, they are relying on the hospitality of other people, other families. So for Jacob to try and make his brother pay for a piece of lasagna, so either everyone has already eaten and there's leftovers left, or everyone is about to eat, or everyone is eating except for Esau. Regardless, Jacob is charging his brother a birthright just for a piece of food. I think this is more of a critique on who Jacob is than Esau. I also wonder, did Esau want to be the person receiving the birthright? He likes to hunt. He likes to be out. He's a man of the field, whereas Jacob likes to be a man of the tents. So I don't really understand exactly what's happening here, but I do know it's important to understand what Esau was giving up. So on the left-hand side, this is what happens when there are 10 sons in the family. The firstborn gets theirs, plus the birthright, Everything else is split up amongst the remaining 9 siblings, 9 sons. When there are only 2 sons, the eldest gets his and the birthright, and the second son gets everything that's left. What's happening is Esau is trading 2/3 of Abraham's full inheritance for 1/3. That's what's happening. So Jacob is doubling his inheritance with one little piece of lasagna. Is that a fair trade? That is not fair. And that is not how you take care of family. Not how you take care of family. Genesis 26, finally, Isaac gets his time in the sun. He lies. He used the same exact lie that his father did to King Abimelech. Probably a different King Abimelech about his wife Rebekah. Oh, just say that you're my sister. But he got caught canoodling with her. He digs wells. He grows wheat. So it shows that he can be both city folk and pastoral nomad. He can bridge both worlds. So Isaac is actually really flexible when it comes to that. So he does some good things, but he's just overshadowed by the rest of the stories. So we hear Jacob's deception of Isaac. We know who's behind this. Rebekah, right? Rebekah is the person controlling the strings, the puppet master. And when Isaac comes dressed up like his brother when Jacob comes dressed up like his brother to deceive his father Isaac, this is basically elder abuse, trying to get the father's blessing. The father says, "Who are you, my son? How is it you've come so quickly, my son?" Asking these questions as if, I don't really trust you, my son. How you're presenting, I'm not trusting what's happening. But he eventually ends up giving him the blessing. So what's happening is Jacob has already swindled his brother out of the birthright. And now he's going to get the blessing, which for all intents and purposes will make him the firstborn son of the family. Because of the blessing and the birthright. But there are major consequences because of this, right? What happens to the family after this? Family is split. Jacob runs away, and Rebekah never sees her favored son again. Because she passes away before she comes home. The blessing is about God's blessing of prosperity, which includes the idea of fertility. Thus, the father's blessing is related to the chance of future progeny. Again, there's this idea that we want future generations to succeed when it comes to wealth and food and children. So Jacob, next to the arrow, runs away, and he runs away to Laban, which is the brother of his favorite mother, right? And we know that Laban is a stand-up individual, right? Would never take advantage of someone else. Actually, we know that Laban does take advantage of people, so it shouldn't surprise us that Rebekah also might be willing to take advantage of people. Maybe they're operating from the same playbook. Esau said, "Is he not rightly named Jacob? For he has betrayed me these 2 times. He took away my birthright, and behold, now he has taken away my blessing." And he said, "Have you not reserved a blessing for me?" So Esau held a grudge against Jacob because of the blessing with which his father had blessed him. And Esau said to himself, "The days of mourning for my father are near, then I will kill my brother Jacob." But this is not the first time there's been proposed violence between brothers, right? Cain and Abel, the first brothers, there definitely was violence, right? And this is not the only time that there will be a threat of or real violence in the story of Abraham, right? We look forward to the story of Joseph and his brothers, right? A lot of conflict between siblings so far. A lot of conflict. So Jacob runs back up north to Paddan-aram, and Jacob meets tender-eyed Leah and beautiful Rachel, and he gets tricked. He ends up getting 2 wives for the fair price of 14 years of labor. He works for 7 years, thinks he's going to marry Rachel. Turns out it's Leah. And then he says, "What have you done to me?" And Laban says, "Fine, I'll give you Rachel as well, but now you have to work another 7 years." So it's work 7 years, get married twice, really close, and then work another 7 years. Could be winning, right? But we'll see what kind of conflict in this marital unit experience, right?
Bryan, I have a question.
Yes.
I'm trying to ask, but I feel like you need to say, hey,
I can say no if I want to.
so I feel like can we reimagine what that was? And like, oh, she tricked, like what else? I love what you did with Sarah and kind of highlighting like this was standard practice in terms of trying to produce babies.
Yep.
And what's another narrative we could have on Rebecca other than she kind of like I think man do this with about like
Yeah.
she's bad Petro. Like what's another way to think about Rebecca in that situation?
Tomorrow, I promise we're going to cover this Rebecca piece. There's another way to frame it. Every behavior is a symptom of the system, and I think she's part of the system. I'll try and make that more clear. So hold on to that thought, Clint. Okay. I love that question. Okay. So how this family lies, they use the same sort of script. Reduce, reuse, recycle. So the first time Abraham lies to Pharaoh, he says, "This is my sibling," to save his own skin. The next time Abe lies to Abimelech, the king of the Philistines, he says, "This is my sibling," to save my own skin. Not a lot of variation right there, right? If it's good for the goose, good for the gander, Isaac uses the exact same playbook. "Me too. This is my sibling, Rebecca," to save his own skin. But this isn't even a white lie, right? This is an all-out lie. So far, they're hitting the same button over and over and over. Okay? Jacob, prompted by Rebecca, lies to his father, saying, "I am my sibling. And here is his skin, you can touch it." And then, I don't think that this is just this might have been handed to him by Rebecca, because later on, Leah, prompted by Laban, lies to Jacob and lies with Jacob, saying, "I am my sibling, and here is her skin." So it's the same sort of lie that they are using. Who is the sibling is super important, not only when it comes to lying, but when it comes to who's important in the family, right? Who the siblings are, super important. So God ended up blessing tender-eyed Leah. In fact, Leah is naming the first 4 sons after this idea that maybe I can connect with my husband. So all these names mean something. And then finally, Judah, "This time I will praise the Lord," because the first few were about her relationship with her husband. And then how fortunate, here's the handmaid Zilpah. So all of these sons, Gad and Asher were from Zilpah, the rest are from Leah. All these sons have specific names in relation to her husband or her God. In Genesis 30, the infertility wars are really ramping up. Now in the days of the wheat harvest, Reuben went and found mandrakes in the field and brought them to his mother Leah. Then Rachel said to Leah, "Please give me some of your son's mandrakes." But she said to her, that's Leah said to Rachel, "Is it a small matter for you to take my husband? And would you take my son's mandrakes also?" So Rachel said, "Therefore, he may lie with you tonight," that's Jacob may lie with you tonight, "in return for your son's mandrakes." Anyone know what a mandrake is? It's a root? Okay, yeah. Luckily, I prepared a little slide for us. Okay? So at the top, there's little fruit, flower sort of things. And the bottom, look at those roots. They're anthropomorphic in shape. Do we see that? Like the legs and the torso and the arms. And so lots of different cultures saw these mandrakes. They're growing in Mother Earth, and when you take them out, they look like little people, right? So these were actually seen as helpful for infertility. Right? Either you could wear them like an amulet around your neck, or you could put them in tea as an aphrodisiac. There's multiple ways that mandrake could help you. But what's really interesting is mandrakes, anyone a physician in here? Psychiatrist? So a deliriant hallucinogenic tropine alkaloid, would that be considered a drug? Yeah. So what's happening is Rachel is selling her husband for drugs. So Leah has a difficult decision to make. I want to get pregnant again, but I don't have access to my husband. But I have these mandrakes. But if I take these mandrakes, these aren't going to help me because I need to have access to my husband. So I'm going to trade these mandrakes, which will help me get pregnant, to my sister that I'm having infertility wars with, so I can have one night with my husband. This is the status of the family. Look at all these trades that are happening, these asymmetric transactions. And this is potentially normal in the family. I was swift in my revenge. I only waited 100 years. The question is, Jacob went over to Laban. If he comes back to Esau, how is Esau going to approach him? Is Esau still going to be ripping mad? What's going to be happening here? So we know that Jacob comes, he sends his wives, his servants as gifts ahead of himself to potentially show Esau, look, I have all of these things. They're a gift for you. Please don't attack me, right? Genesis 31, Jacob actually runs, as he's heading towards Canaan, thinking about how he's going to meet his brother. He runs away with the family idols. So he runs away, and Laban, when he figures out that his family idols are gone, he runs after Jacob. Remember the story? He stops them, and he says, like, hey, where are my idols? Where are they? And Jacob says, whoa, he swears up and down, I don't know where they are. You can look all over. So Jacob says you can look anywhere he wants. Laban comes, he looks everywhere except for in the tent where Rachel is, and it's Rachel's time that she's menstruating, and she's sitting on the saddle of a camel. You can't come in here because I'm menstruating. But inside the camel bags are these idols. So the question is, did Jacob know these idols were there? Or was it just Rachel that was hiding these idols? I think that Jacob knew. Here's why. Later on in the story, there's a mention of these idols, and there's no mention of Jacob going, whoa, where did these come from? And we know that Jacob is a deceiver, right? And this is not the only time in the Bible that someone swears up and down that they're not doing anything wrong. Remember the story of Peter in the court of the high priest, swearing up and down, I don't know this man, I don't know the Nazarene, even though it's clear that he did. I wouldn't be surprised if Jacob's in that same boat. He knows what's happening. He may have even helped Rachel. We'll see later on in the story when that show up. So Jacob is afraid of Esau. Israel reunites with Esau. That's he gets his name change. Then Dinah, Leah and Jacob's daughter, was sexually assaulted. Levi and Simeon get revenge on Shechem. Jacob is passive, but he's upset about this. So what happens is Dinah is taken captive and sexually assaulted. And then the prince of Shechem comes out and says, I want to marry your daughter. But we don't find out to the end of the story that he's still holding Dinah captive in the city. And Jacob/Israel doesn't do anything about it. So his two sons, Levi and Simeon, say, sure, you can marry your daughter, but every one of you needs to get circumcised. So the whole town gets circumcised. And they come in with swords, and they take out the whole town. And Jacob is really concerned. He says to Simeon, Levi, you have brought trouble upon me by making me a stench to the Canaanites and Perizzites, the people of this land. We are few in number. If they unite against me and attack me, I and my house will be destroyed. He's very interested in preserving his own skin, right? Not too far distant from his father's, right? Really interested in keeping himself safe. But they replied, should he have treated our sister like a prostitute? And I think this might actually be a dig at what's happening in the romantic relationship in the parental unit. Okay, so what is Jacob and Israel about now? Is he interested in caring for the family, or is he interested in taking care of himself? Because it seems pretty clear he also has favorites, right? He has a favorite wife and a favorite son, right? You know Joseph gets special treatment. Jacob takes and buries the family idols here in Genesis 35, so that's 4 chapters later. He buries the family idols, and there's no mention of a big surprise. You've been hiding these idols all the time? It's just very casual, and he buried the idols. Like he didn't need them anymore. So I think he might have been aware this was happening. Rachel dies, which is a big shift in the family. Benjamin is born. Reuben sleeps with Bilhah, which is Rachel's maidservant. So this is Reuben saying, my father is unfit to lead this family. Watch, I'm going to do this, and no one's going to stop me. Yes?
Do we know if Jacob and his brother Esau had any more families besides other wives?
Do they have any more? So Esau had his own family, right?
They're only talking about, the wives.
Right.
Do they have any other family besides them? Because, according to the Bible, a lot of Abraham had their,
Additional wives.
yes.
Right. So it's clear that Esau had at least 3 wives, and Jacob had 2, plus the midwives. So you could say that Jacob had 4 partners.
So we only know about,
Right. We only.
so they don't know what happened to what kids they had, did they need the Bible?
Right. Exactly. We don't know if Esau's wives had other handmaids to help with, or midwives, or partners to help with infertility. We don't know that. Yeah, we don't know that. But we're definitely following through each chapter the infertility that these families experience from generation to generation. Jacob sees his father again, no mention of Rebekah. Genesis 36, Esau's descendants, the Edomites. And now here's the family system right here. We have Zilpah, who's the biological mother of Gad and Asher. Leah is the biological mother of Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, and Zebulun, and Dinah. Joseph and Benjamin, biological sons of Rachel, and Dan and Naphtali, the biological sons of Bilhah. So this is how this whole thing's shaping up. Esau has 3 wives, Judith, Basemath, and Mahalath. Sweet names. If you're looking for names, these are options. Joseph is different from his brothers, yeah? He's different in several ways. In fact, his brothers saw that their father loved him, that's Joseph, more than all of his brothers, so they hated him and could not speak to him on friendly terms. This is talking about emotional cutoff. I cannot speak nicely to you. I hate you. We may sit at the same table, but you are not getting any of my attention, showing no respect. Here's why. He's a tattletale. Joseph tattletales, he snitches on his brothers. That's not something you should necessarily do. He is clearly Israel's favorite, right? Jacob loved Joseph. He's the firstborn of Israel's favorite wife. He's gifted a coat of many colors or a royal coat, so he's dressed differently than his brothers. He's not assigned the same labor responsibilities as his brothers. His brothers are out tending the flocks, and Joseph is at home. In fact, he's kind of like his father's Aaron. Go check on the other brothers and come back to me. He doesn't have the same hard labor as the rest of them do. And then he has dreams, right, of his brother's family bowing down to him, and he shares them twice. So would I want to be a brother of Joseph? Probably not. That would be unpleasant. He's given special treatment, special clothes, different responsibilities, and he shows that to all of us. That can be unpleasant, right? So I think this comes into play down the road as we're thinking about the story. So the brothers are upset with this, right? So one option, they could have, at the very bottom set, they could have told Joseph to stop saying in many different ways that he's better than them. They could have said maybe just steal his coat and get rid of his coat. They could have said like, hey, let's tell your dad that this favoritism is hurtful. Instead, they sell Joseph into slavery. That's their solution, right? Even animals are not safe when this family wants something for themselves. In the previous generation, remember how Jacob killed an animal so his mom could cook it? He put the skin on and brought that food to his father to trick him. In this generation, the sons kill an animal, put the blood on the coat of Joseph, and bring that to their father to trick him. So if people want something in this family, they're going to do everything they can to get it, even if it means stepping on, over, or through people. Genesis 38, there's Judah and Tamar. Genesis 39, Joseph prospers in Egypt, then he's imprisoned. Genesis 40, the dreamer becomes the interpreter. Genesis 41, Joseph becomes the viceroy, the most powerful person in Egypt, and he makes this big plan to store all the food so that they're ready for the famine when it comes. In Genesis 42 to 45, Joseph seems to have prescient knowledge because there's another famine in the land. Every single generation, there's famine. And the brothers come down to Egypt to get food, right? And they don't recognize who this viceroy of Egypt is. They have not seen Joseph. They do not recognize him, but he definitely recognizes them. He imprisons all of his brothers. Then he keeps Simeon hostage, and he's asking these interesting questions about their youngest brother, Benji, right? That's what about Benji. He sends them home, and when the brothers are returning home to Canaan, they're going back up north, they realize not only do they have food in their sacks, they also have the coinage, the money that was supposed to be meant to purchase the food, are also in the sacks. And they were told from the viceroy of Egypt, don't come back unless you bring your youngest brother, because otherwise I think you might be spies. That's why he's holding on Simeon. But this famine is lasting longer than expected. So Jacob / Israel has an important decision to make. Do I send my sons and my new or my last son from my favorite wife back down to Egypt to get food, but I might lose him? Or do I not send them down and my whole family starves? Do I preserve the one or take care of the many? And he eventually relents, and it's Judah who actually steps up and says, I'll take responsibility for this. So the brothers come back with Benjamin, the last favorite son of Rebekah, because his favorite son passed away. So Joseph seats them in birth order, and give Benjamin 5 times the food portions. And the brothers are thinking, how does he know all of this? He must have very special knowledge, right? And then he sends them away with the food, but he puts a cup used for divination to get like spiritual divine information. He puts that in Benjamin's sack. So the brothers are all going back up to Canaan, and the viceroy of Egypt sends his servant after the brothers, say, whoa, stop. Someone stole the divination cup. And all of a sudden, well, you can look in all of our packs. It's not here. So very similar, right, to what Jacob was saying when Laban was racing after. You can look everywhere. We do not have the family idols. It's kind of the story playing out again. We don't have this divination cup. So the head servant goes through, opens up all the packs, and lo and behold, he gets to Benjamin's pack, opens it up, and there, in the bright sunlight, is this beautiful divination cup. Now, something has happened in this family. Something very important. Because up until this point in the story, we know the brothers have been trying to get rid of Jacob's favorite son, Joseph, right? At this point in the story, they tore their clothes in grief. Why did they tear their clothes? Because little guy is going to get took, right? This is important because we've been waiting several chapters for this to happen. When Joseph was sent away, they tore his clothes. When they brought the bloody evidence to their father Jacob, Jacob tore his clothes. And finally, now all the brothers tear their clothes in grief. So now everyone has finally grieved. This is important because if they also did not like Benjamin, this would have been like the perfect cover for saying, Dad, I'm so sorry we got your food, but your favorite son stole the divination cup. And the most powerful person in Egypt called him down to Egypt. We could not do a thing about it. I'm so sorry you lost your favorite son. Instead, they tear their clothes and say, no, we are all going down to Egypt. You are not taking him from us. Yes?
I think that they wanted to erase the existence of Joseph, in front of Jacob. And when they noticed that Joseph was still alive, and called him out, it's kind of like, what, we want your son to be alive because he was his favorite, and him, over us. So, we tear everything apart. We made you believe that he was dead. So, it's interesting actually to think that families still exist with that.
Yes. So I'm trying to summarize. They tried to erase the story of Joseph from the family. He is gone. He is dead. He's no longer alive. Don't even think about him. And in doing so, they are erasing Joseph from family life. He's no longer present physically, but he might be still present psychologically, right? And now there's this chance to also erase Benjamin physically. But they don't take that chance. Instead, they stand up to protect him, to keep him in the family. They did not do that with Joseph. So that's why I think Joseph is doing this. He's testing the family rules. What's happening amongst my brothers? Are they getting along? Or is there still a lot of unresolved tension between how they would have treated the favored brother in the past? They would have gotten rid of him. But something's changed, right? Something has changed in the family. We're going to talk about this a little bit tomorrow as well. I think Joseph is testing the family system to see what are the rules of the family system right now, because every behavior is a symptom of the system. So, after this quick bird's eye view, what are some of Abraham's family rules? What are the intergenerational patterns of behavior? How do people handle anxiety and tension? Who are the villains? Who are the heroes? Let's see if a genogram can help us answer some of these things. So here's the genogram. 1, 2, 3, 4 generations. Let's start putting some of these genogram relational lines on here to see what happens. All right. In each generation, there's at least one person who shows defiance. We have Hagar, Ishmael, Esau, and the sons on Leah's side. These individuals show defiance. These individuals lie. In the purple boxes, those individuals all lie. Notice how sometimes those in the purple boxes are seen as the good guys. And sometimes those who are defiant are seen as the bad guys. There's conflict between Abraham and Sarah, Hagar and Sarah, Sarah and Ishmael, Ishmael and Isaac, Isaac and Rebekah, Rebekah and Esau, Esau and Jacob, Laban and Jacob, tension between Jacob and Leah, Leah and Rachel, and between the sons. In every generation, there's tension and conflict. In every generation, there's favoritism towards the younger sibling. Every single generation. In every generation, there's extreme manipulation occurring. In fact, she should even be one up where Abram and Sarah concerned when Abram is saying, hey, can you pretend like you're my sister? So in every generation, there's extreme manipulation. In every generation, there's cutoff in the family as a way to resolve situations. So Hagar is run away from Sarah, then kicked out by Sarah, and Ishmael's kicked out from Sarah. Jacob runs away from Esau, runs away from Laban, and then the brothers sell Joseph to their cousins, the Ishmaelites. So one way this family solves problems is to get rid of the person that is part of the conflict. And when we send someone away, when we kick them out, does that mean the conflict disappears? Kicking someone out is a short-term solution, not a long-term solution to the challenge. So I wonder if Abram was running away from something in Ur. I don't know for sure, but I know it's happened in other generations, and I wonder if Abram was just wanting a different sort of life, a slower pace of life, because he and his wife were infertile. I wonder if that was something that was happening. There's this unrepaired rift between Ishmael and Isaac, and we know that this rift in this family has lasted for millennia, right? The Ishmael, the descendants of Isaac, big difference between these two groups of people. So when you kick someone out, that unresolved tension does not disappear. It's still present. And we are still feeling the effects geopolitically today. So, who are the villains? Who are the heroes? Can someone tell me who's the villain in the story? Sarah. Why is Sarah a villain? Yeah, this is good.
She perpetrated some things in order for them to conceive.
She stirred up drama, right, in the family, bringing someone else into the marital unit so that we could have a baby, and that caused some distress, right? And then she changed her mind. Oh, now I'm jealous that Hagar is pregnant. Now I want to kick you out. Okay, so she is sometimes seen as a villain, unfaithful and stirring up drama. Rachel or Rebecca?
I'm sorry, Rebecca.
Why is Rebecca sometimes seen as a villain?
That's
Isaac's wife, yes.
yeah, she allowed Jacob to wear that fur.
Yeah, encourage him to wear the fur.
Yeah, and let that happen, knowing that Isaac was blind, knowing that he, touched
Yes.
the kid. So she allowed that. She was also a villain.
Yeah, she's a villain because she's purposely creating this plan to trick her husband. She's a villain. Okay, good. Who is another villain?
The brothers of Joseph,
The brothers of Joseph are villains, okay? Why are they villains?
because they sold them out because they were jealous.
Because they're doing bad things. Uh-huh.
There's a lot of villains in this story.
There's a lot of villains in the story.
Who's the brother who, like, one of the sons of Israel who, like, you were supposed to, give a son so that was it Tamar? Like, she basically...
Judah and Tamar.
Judah and Tamar,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
he was a villain. Like, he didn't go through, like, take care of business.
He did not take care of
So that
business.
she could be taken care of.
But later on, he actually becomes more of a hero later on in the story. But he was seen as a villain.
These people can be heroes and villains.
All these people can be hero and villains. Listen, well, Laban's a villain. He's just a bad guy, right?
Well, in a way they were heroes in a way because they had our fathers, our, people who were teaching us and the
Wait, say it one more time? Yeah, no, I like where you're going.
Females and heroes at the same time because they have their sons, like I said, and all that kind of thing. So yes, they were villains and heroes at the same time. But yes, in order for that to happen, we need to read the history of what the Bible says and say that yes, we have villains, we have heroes at the same time. We do have them right now.
Okay, so there are heroes who can also be villains, and the villainness and the hero-ness can be taught and transferred down to subsequent generations, and even today in our family, we have heroes and villains. Sometimes people are both. I want to take the story of the brothers of Joseph. Everything that they did, you could say, they were following the family rules to a T. In some ways, they were really good family members. Listen to the family rules. Okay, so far, we've seen all these patterns of passed down. A sweet family to invite over for Thanksgiving, right? It's all sit around the table, and all of this stuff is happening. And every generation, there's conflict in the marital unit at the top. In every generation, the younger son receives a blessing. In every generation, there's conflict between the siblings, and the big rule is do whatever is expedient for you. So in some ways, the brothers of Joseph were wrapping up all the big family rules in Abraham's telenovela and fulfilling all of those rules to a T. So are they the villains, or are they following the family rules? Every behavior is a symptom of the system. And if we can see those behaviors that we see or deem or characterize as unpleasant, but they are part of a system, who is responsible for the system? Everybody needs to take some responsibility. And there's a lot of responsibility that was not accounted for in each generation. Kicking people out does not solve a problem. Choosing favorites does not solve a problem. Doing what is expedient and lying and tricking does not solve the problem. There's a lot of unresolved tension in all these generations. So if your family somehow sniffs a little bit like or echoes some of this, you're in good company, because you might be part of Abraham's family. Whatever we refuse to acknowledge, we will undoubtedly and unconsciously pass on to others. If we can understand the behavior that we have as part of a larger pattern following certain family rules, we can decide whether or not we want to follow those family rules. If we're not aware of it, it's hard to change. And there are effects to the individual's well-being and life satisfaction as well. Genesis 25, verse 7. These are all the years of Abraham's life that he lived, 175 years. And Abraham breathed his last and died at a good old age, an old man and satisfied with life. And he was gathered to his people. Let's look at Isaac. Genesis 35. Now the days of Isaac were 180 years old. 180. Then Isaac breathed his last and died, and he was gathered to his people, an old man of ripe age. And his sons Esau and Jacob buried him. What's different between Abraham and Isaac here? Satisfaction with life. Satisfied with life. Let's go to the next generation. Genesis 47. So Jacob is talking with Pharaoh, and Pharaoh asked him about his life. And Jacob/Israel is responding, the years of my living abroad are 130. Few and unpleasant have been the years of my life. Nor have they attained the years that my fathers lived during the days of living abroad. So what's the difference? There's a shift in life satisfaction in each generation. And that's something that happens in our families when there's unresolved tension. Not just the behavior passed down, the unresolved tension is also passed down like a precious family heirloom. Too many people spend their lives being dutiful descendants instead of being good ancestors. The responsibility of each generation not to please their predecessors is to improve things for their offspring. It's more important to make your children proud than your parents proud. Genesis 48. Something else happens. So Jacob is near the end of his days, and Joseph comes to Jacob, and behold, I will make you fruitful and numerous, and I will make you a multitude of peoples. So Jacob is recounting to Joseph how God has acted in his life. He's saying, God Almighty appeared to me. I will make you fruitful and numerous. So this is echoing God's promise to Abram and Sarai. And will give this land to your descendants. Again, the people and the land. After you an everlasting possession. And then Jacob takes this left turn off into the cornfield and makes a really interesting statement. He's talking about God, how God has blessed him. And then he starts talking about his wife, Rachel. Now your 2 sons, who were born to you in the land of Egypt before I came to you in Egypt, are mine. He's saying, those 2 sons are mine. He's adopting them. Ephraim and Manasseh shall be mine, just as Reuben and Simeon are. I'm taking your sons and adopting them. But your children that you have fathered after them shall be yours. They shall be called by the names of their brothers and their inheritance. Now as for me, when I came from Paddan, Rachel died, to my sorrow, in the land of Canaan on the journey, when there was still some distance to go to Ephrath. I buried her there on the way to Ephrath, that is Bethlehem. So he's saying, God has blessed me, I'm adopting your 2 sons, and I'm remembering Rachel. Why is he doing this? I don't know for sure, but Rachel died in childbirth. We know that Rachel wanted to have more children. I wonder if Jacob is adopting these 2 sons from Jacob, from the line of Rachel, as his 2 sons under Rachel. So it's like Rachel had 2 more children. There's a lot of conflict between Leah and Rachel. I'll get to your hand. Hold on. We get through this little story. Now the eyes of Israel were so dim from age that he could not see, so Joseph brought Ephraim and Manasseh to him, and he put the eldest and the youngest on the correct side so that Israel could bless them. And as Israel puts out his hands to bless them, he crosses his hands. Here we go. Israel says, God, let me see your children as well, because I didn't think I was going to see your face. It's not working. Here we go. So he took them both, and Israel reached out his right hand and placed it on the head of Ephraim, who is younger, and his left hand on Manasseh's head, crossing his hands. And Joseph saw this, that his father had placed his right hand on Ephraim, and it displeased him. So Joseph does not like what's happening. He grabs his father's hand and tries to put it on the right child. So you're doing it wrong, Dad. You're doing it wrong. And Joseph said to his father, not so, my father, for this one is the first. You must be getting confused. Place your right hand on his head. But his father, Israel, refused and said, I know, my son, I know. He also will become a people, and he also will be great. However, his younger brother shall be greater than he, and his descendants shall become a multitude of nations. Why is this so powerful to me? Imagine Isaac sends his eldest son Esau out to get food. We know that God has already promised, right, that the older will serve the younger. God has already told Rebekah and Isaac this is what's going to happen between Jacob and Esau. Isaac sends, as he's getting older, he sends Esau out to get some food. Imagine if Esau came back and Isaac would have said, you know what? Go get your brother. Brother comes in. And I'm imagining the rift in the family that Jacob has caused and how he never got to see his biological mother again. What would have happened if his father would have crossed his hand? Esau would have said, you're doing it wrong, Dad. And Dad says, I know. You'll become a great people as well. But I'm going to bless this is what's going to happen. And all of a sudden, the whole family can stay together. But that's not how the family stayed together. There was no opportunity for that. The deception robbed the family of the opportunity to work through stuff. When we lie about things, we're not given the opportunity to work through conflict. It just intensifies the conflict. So, closing theological reflections, but you had a question, Kenneth.
I just was wondering if why Reuben and Simeon, like these two, are going to be just like Reuben, like if they're any kind of God.
Good question. So I don't have all the answers. I have an idea. So he's saying like these two are going to be my legitimate sons. Going to be like, and later on he actually ends up cursing Reuben and Simeon for how they were behaving in the family. He doesn't tackle things directly. He waits till he's on his deathbed and he curses them instead of blessing them. So he's saying, I'm wanting two sons that are good sons. I'm going to take them. Maybe knowing what he's about to do later on down the line. Yes?
I think that a lot of this whole thing started with the liars, with the deceiving, with everything. Came in a that comes from the villas in the heroes back
Yeah.
to that date.
Yeah, so you can track it all the way back to Cain and Abel, the unresolved tension between them. And we often see Cain as the bad guy, right? Cain is the bad guy. I wonder if he was looking for something, as if he's all selfish.
Well, I believe they, when he left, they was trying to build a good thing with God.
Yeah,
But he was so jealous that, the anger on him took over him,
Do you think any jealousy was showing up in Abraham's family?
I'm sorry?
Do you think there was any jealousy in Abraham's family between the siblings? Yeah. Jealousy is powerful, right? It's powerful. It moves us to do things that maybe normally wouldn't be in accordance with our values, but at the moment we want something. And we still have it today, right? Absolutely. This should not be too far from distant from what we are experiencing in our families or around us. So closing theological reflections. 1, God chose to make and remake his covenant with this family. This is not the pristine, perfect family, right? There's a lot of challenge here. People seem to work really, really hard in the family, even taking advantage of others in their family, to obtain or protect God's already promised blessings. Yet somehow they seem to put that promise in jeopardy. Instead of staying together, people are kicked out. They run away, separated from one another. People are leaving Canaan constantly, even though God promised them Canaan. God works even harder to not let our dysfunction in our family ruin his covenant with us. It's righteousness by faith for a reason. God chose to renew his covenant with each of these generations. Righteousness by faith, not righteousness by perfect family. Fierce covenant loyalty from the divine, the hesed, from the divine to humanity is contrasted with the family loyalty in Abraham's family. There's not a lot of it. Sometimes the actions of one person can change a family tree. One person doing intentional things to change their own behavior and how they respond to people can change the family tree. Sometimes we have to get out of chaos and dysfunction in order to heal and change. Joseph was kicked out of his family, but he also had an opportunity to not be stuck in the muck and mire of the family. And in doing so, he actually created new space for the family. He created a whole area for them to come and settle in Goshen during the time of the famine. Sometimes we need, I'm not saying, hear what I'm saying, what I'm not saying. Having space from people is a good short-term coping mechanism. But if that's my solution, space, it doesn't resolve the tension. And if I'm not working on myself, then I can't go back and interact in a different manner. Yes? Sometimes some distance is healthy, right? Yeah. Often we're not getting out of dysfunctional emotional or behavior patterns until we get clear of toxic systems. Families, organizations, churches, relationships in which we're enmeshed. Hard to heal when the relational oxygen we're breathing every day is polluted. Sometimes we need space. But space in and of itself is not the solution, right? We can use space and heal during that space. Jeremiah 31:29, in those days they will say again, the fathers have eaten sour grapes, and the children's teeth are set on edge. So what's some stuff that you noticed in Abraham's family that we missed, that I didn't notice? How might this change the way you see Abraham's family after hearing this? And how might this change the way you see your family or romantic relationship? So what's something you noticed in Abraham's family that I missed? How could this potentially change, or how has this changed the way you see Abraham's family? How could this change the way you see your own relationship with other people in your family?
I think he saw it here. Like he got, he despised his brother, but like he got swindled, man.
He got swindled. Esau got swindled. Yeah.
He could have killed his brother.
Yeah.
With his stuff.
Yes.
And so when they met back up, he did the work.
Something changed by the time Jacob/Israel returned, absolutely. In fact, when you read that story, I'm going to get some tingles. When Jacob returns to see Esau, read that chapter, then go read the story of the prodigal son. There's so many similarities, it's eerie. I wonder if Jesus, when he's telling the story of the prodigal son, he's taking the imagery of two people that have been distant for a long time and showing what's happening. Because Esau, same sort of thing, he runs after him, he embraces him. That's not something an enemy normally does, or someone who has been shunned or disrespected in the way that Esau was disrespected. There's been some work done. Thank you. Good. What else?
Well, I think that, okay, you talk about distance, you talk about family, you talk about relationships within ourselves. I think the distancing between family members is a good idea because you end up like you want to, at that moment in time, you just want to strangle them and that kind of thing. So you distance yourself. Relationship with a husband and wife is totally different. It's like let them talk, and then you just go and scream like in your room and all get pillow. Because sometimes it's just there's no understanding. So there's a lot of praying, that stuff. There's a lot of praying so God give me strength so that I can understand what they're going through. And it is hard. It is hard. Wait.
It is hard either way, right? It would be hard to be part of this family. Because we're part of this family system. We learn what we learn. We learn the dance steps that they're dancing, so it makes sense they were repeating the same dance steps in each generation. In fact, you could say it was perfected by the time we came to Joseph's brothers, right? We're all doing it in Abraham's family mafia. Yeah.
I want to answer a question number one. What
Yep.
stuff did you notice in Abraham's family that
Yeah.
you missed? I'm seeing it in husband's perspective, wanting Abraham to grant his wife's,
Desire
desire
to have
get
children.
rid of Sarah.
Uh-huh.
I mean, it's a common dynamic nowadays that I don't want no argument. Okay, I'm just going to give it to what you want.
Uh-huh.
So,
There is some power at play here,
Yeah.
right? We're going to talk more about this tomorrow. Abraham is in a difficult situation if he's trying to maintain a good relationship with Sarah and Hagar, a good relationship with Ishmael and Isaac. He's caught in the middle in an unstable triangle between these two individuals, and it's a very precarious position for him. We're going to talk about that more. It's hard for him to, what do you do here? Do you side with one and kick the other person out? Do you say, I'm not going to say no to this person, but there's tension between them? Whew, a difficult situation. It's tough, yeah.
Yeah, you said that, in those days, that people might use handmaidens.
Yeah.
Kind of a IVF type thing.
Yeah.
And, Sarah was kind of, but I see it a little differently in that God told Sarah, you don't need to do that.
Yeah,
I got you.
right.
And so the takeaway on that to me is, well, the world might be doing something, and that might be culturally okay, but if God tells you to do something, it's probably better to listen to God than to look around and see what the culture's doing.
Yes. So I hear what you're saying. So God had promised Abraham and Sarah a child from themselves biologically. So her using the IVF of the day. Was that her being unfaithful? I don't know. I think it's hard because at that point in the time, it wasn't as clear. Later on, God reiterates his promise to Abraham to make it clearer. But at that point in time, she's been waiting a long time. Maybe she's like, oh, I did not have a handmaiden. Now we have a handmaiden from Egypt. This is an option. Did it cause more strife in the family?
Maybe God needs to help.
Yeah. It's hard to wait, right? It's hard to wait. And the promise and calling of God to Abraham and Sarah had to wait 25 years. That's a quarter of the century to wait for God's promise. I get impatient, like when the microwave is taking 90 seconds instead of 45 seconds. Like to turn over my frozen burrito. I don't want to wait that long. That's a long wait. We don't know how many attempts Abraham said. We don't know what's going on with their story of infertility, but a lot of challenges. I wouldn't be surprised.
Well, I sympathize with Sarah for waiting so long because, being not knowing that you can have a gift one day, it's like waiting and waiting and waiting. For me to have one daughter, the wait was terrible, and it was anxious and it was desperate and it was hard. So I sympathize.
And it's not always promised, right?
And the jealousy that she felt.
It's not promised. Having children is not promised. Having enough food is not promised. These two things we are still facing today. These two of the big challenges we're facing today. Okay. It will take every triggered nerve, every tremble in your voice, every butterfly in your belly, and every rejoicing ancestor for you to say, no, I'm not doing this anymore. If you can understand your patterns and every behavior is a symptom of the system and understand where you come from, you can use a family tree genogram like this and probably track your behavior patterns on a family tree. And you can say, oh, I've just been practicing this for 3 or 4 generations. That's why I'm so good at it. And now that I'm good at it, maybe I can do something different. We're going to talk about relational triangles tomorrow afternoon, and I'm hoping you're going to be able to join. We're going to talk more about like what happens when anxiety is passed like a hot potato between us. What do we do when people are trying to rope us into their unresolved tension? What's our response to that sort of thing? There's a lot of triangles here. We're going to keep using Abraham's family later on. All right, let's pray. Father God, I thank you that you are so patient with us. I thank you that you do not give up on us. You are loyal to us. You are faithful to us, even though we are not always faithful. You know what kind of families we come from. You know the dysfunction we are familiar with and used to and sometimes okay with. I pray you give us insight into what we have been doing and give us direction to what we could be doing. I pray you help us make strong changes, even though it takes a lot of emotional lift and fervor and bravery. I pray you help us break behavior patterns that have been passed down from generation to generation. You are a God who can do all things. You can break generational strongholds. Take our hearts into your hands tonight and speak to us and guide us. Show us what you want us to do differently. Amen.